The National Legal and Policy Center's Peter Flaherty telling One America News that his group is sounding the alarm about publicly traded businesses that support abortion rights. One America's John Hines has that story.
You are taking on woke corporations over this issue of abortion. You have an op-ed out that calls out several American corporations for their support of abortion rights in various ways. What seems to be happening in your estimation, sir?
Well, you're right. A lot of companies have waded into this debate. We believe that it's unfair and they should not do so. It's a divisive issue. Any company, any public company certainly, has thousands of shareholders, employees, customers, business partners, and there's no consensus on this issue, and companies should be respectful of that rather than taking a particular position.
In the old days, a lot of companies assumed that it was too risky to take a political position, but now it appears that some are taking a political position. What has changed, and why do you feel it is necessary for the National Legal and Policy Center to stand up and call it out?
Well, I think we not only have an economic divide in this country, we have a social divide. Whereas the CEOs of these companies, they're multimillionaires, in some cases billionaires, and their social and political beliefs are much different than the majority of the people. They're much further to the left. And that's why I think you see these big companies jumping in on issues where they really don't belong. Now, as far as the National Legal and Policy Center, we sponsor the Corporate Integrity Project. And one thing we have advocated is that big companies, especially public companies, be neutral on controversial public policy positions. If it doesn't affect their bottom line, it's really unfair to the people involved with the company to take a position.
So we're talking about, for instance, a couple of companies I think that you mentioned in your op-ed. One is this outdoor clothing purveyor called Patagonia, and another one is this concert promoter, Live Nation. What are they doing that maybe investors, stockholders may not be aware of in terms of some issues that may be controversial for a lot of people, a lot of conservatives?
Well, they've taken it one step further. They just haven't jumped into the debate. In the case of Live Nation, they've donated $500,000 to Planned Parenthood. Both companies, Live Nation and Patagonia, are offering legal representation to any of their employees arrested in what they call peaceful protests against abortion. Now, I believe that this is far from their mission, and it's also at odds with what the American people believes.
So what you're saying is potentially this is one of those areas that is at least a gray area. Peaceful protests can quickly become non-peaceful, and indeed, whether or not you're protesting peacefully, it is against the law to protest at the home of a federal judge in an attempt to influence a decision in a court case. There is a statute, a federal statute against that, of course, and it includes the term parading in front of a federal judge's house, right?
And let's consider the context. We're not talking about people just peacefully exercising their rights. In recent weeks, we've had an assassination attempt on Justice Kavanaugh. We've had violence directed against Catholic churches and pro-life counseling centers. And you've had these boisterous protests where the messaging is often filled with bigotry and vulgarity.
In the old days, would it not have been the case that perhaps shareholders would have engaged in this process? Why is the National Legal and Policy Center having to maybe step in where shareholders might have engaged in past years in pushing back against some of this corporate activism, particularly with regard to a liberal left-leaning agenda?
Well, if you look at the 100 biggest companies in this country, usually they have three biggest shareholders. That would be BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. And what these companies do, these investment companies, is they vote their shares that aren't really their shares. They're the shares of people who invested in their funds.
We have mutual funds that are managed by these companies.
And you have these executives who are very wealthy, and as I indicated before, their social and political beliefs tend to be at odds with the majority of the American people and tend to be, quite left-wing.
Peter Flaherty, who is the chairman of the National Legal and Policy Center, talking about an op-ed you've written calling out some corporations which are becoming very active in the abortion issue on the pro-choice side of that issue, apparently. Thank you very much for talking to us on One American News. Good to catch up with you.
Good to see you, John.
And Republican.